everybody on this call so that we don't have any background noise, interference, or anything like that. So if I've muted you, just know that that if you need to get up, you need to take care of anything, we'll do that, because it's going to end up being probably the best audio quality for Brett, our presenter today. I have done a number of Zoom calls over the past year, but we've been doing a podcast over Zoom for much longer than just this past year, as a lot of people are becoming used to Zoom. So just a couple quick things. If you're not used to Zoom, make sure again that if I have muted you, to keep yourself on mute. If you don't know how to do that, it's just in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen typically. And all you need to do there is just hit that mute button. If you want to ask a question, at the bottom bar of your screen there, you should see a number of different things depending on what type of computer you're using. In the middle of that bottom bar, you'll see a chat. And I'm going to type in it right now saying, "Hi, everyone." And that's a great spot that if you have a question on your mind and you want to park it there, I'll be watching that chat and I can ask Brett for you. And then certainly if your screen is illuminated, you're not one of just the text boxes that I see, you can obviously also raise your hand and I'll get to you as well. But what we want this to be is a live discussion. We want it to be interactive. I've had Brett on as a podcast guest before, and we'll wait another minute or two just to make sure that we don't have anybody that was planning to be on that is logging in late. And we'll get ready to do our live broadcast here in just a moment. Brett, do you want to get a screen share up first here so that people can see their screen? And it's probably another good reminder for people is that depending on your preference, you can do a number of different things with how you're viewing this screen. You can view it as a gallery, but you can also view it as a main speaker or active speaker. So that typically is a good way to just make sure that you're illuminated on the correct speaker and the correct presentation. Okay, so let's get going. Brett and I have been on, and actually comes from the real estate brokerage side of things, just like I do. Brett is a podcast host of Capital Gains Tax Solutions. And one of the reasons why we decided to connect today is Brett had just completed a transaction in Colorado Springs where he employed what's called a Deferred Sales Trust. And it's an intriguing way of deferring long-term capital gains. And Brett, I'm going to let you go ahead and start the presentation, start the discussion. I'll, of course, ask questions as we go along, and I'll let you take it away from here, Brett.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We're going to move fast because I know everyone's time is so valuable, but here's the beauty. We're recording this, okay? And so Kyle will have it on his page and probably his website or his YouTube. So realize that you will be able to rewind this at some point, but there's a lot of content to cover, okay? So we're talking about the 3 secrets to an optimal timing transformational exit plan. And it's centered around a client of mine. His name is Dave, okay? And Dave might be like you or folks that you know. You know, he's a baby boomer. He's been in real estate for 30 years. He's bought and sold, hundreds of properties. He actually first started out as a real estate broker and then moved into just the ownership and management of assets for himself and his family. He's got a couple kids and they're in the business too. They love it. And he's fallen in love with the commercial real estate cash flow. But for the first time in his real estate, career, if you will, lifetime, he decided to use something called the Deferred Sales Trust. Okay, so this is all about how I helped Dave to finally achieve relief in retirement when he sold his $7.6 million multifamily building and save, or defer is probably a better word, $1.1 million in capital gains tax without having to do a 1031 exchange. And so that's me. I'm the host of the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, as well as the founder of the company Capital Gains Tax Solutions. And as a legal disclaimer, I'm not a CPA nor a tax attorney, although I've learned from some of the best in the business. But each deal depends on your individual circumstances. So we strongly urge you to seek independent legal, tax, and professional advice. There's a big storm going on, Kyle, and the rest of the guests here, and this is called the perfect storm. I don't know if you've seen some of those movies where you have those boats in the middle of the ocean, or you're going down that foggy road where it's uncertainty what's happening on the other side. or you're in a cold front where things are freezing over and things are really challenging. Well, that's going on right now, literally, with what the American Bankers Association has found, that about 17 trillion, upwards of 20 trillion now, of assets will pass from one generation to the next in the next 20 years. And this is known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. And in fact, these baby boomers that are transferring this wealth, about 77 million are starting to retire every day in the US. And in fact, there's about 10,000 turning 65 every day. And what are they faced with? Well, they're faced with highly appreciated primary homes, investment real estate, stock, okay, businesses, okay? And they are looking for ways to potentially sell and or diversify their wealth without getting hammered by capital gains tax, right? On top of that, you have interest rates hovering near 40-year lows. You have tons of uncertainty with going on with COVID-19 and potentially this 13-year bull market run. When is maybe the shoe going to drop? Is it going to stay around? We don't know. But you also couple that with 1031 timelines being very restrictive. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And then very low inventory, right? To make sense of selling my asset now and not having time on my side to find a deal, right? And that is what we're going to focus on like a laser today, okay? So what is the challenge? Well, you might feel like this gentleman, you feel trapped. You feel trapped. Why? Well, the capital gains tax and depreciation recapture can be as high as 33 to 50% of your gain. So every single day, high net worth primary home, business, stock, and investment real estate owners, by the way, it also applies to cryptocurrency owners, they pay hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in capital gains tax when they don't have to. So again, let's focus on Dave, my client. He was in your position about a year ago, sitting down, learning about the Deferred Sales Trust for the first time. And why did he decide to use the Deferred Sales Trust? Well, he said, well, Brett, I wanted to be able to time the real estate market. I wanted to be able to buy commercial real estate when it was more of a buyer's lower price market instead of overpaying in a highly appreciated and highly priced market. Very simple. He wanted to sell high and buy low. He had gone through multiple market cycles. He's been here before. He's seen what happened in 2008. He's seen how long it took real estate to bottom out until 2011. He's been there before. And guess what? He's older now. He wants to spend time with his grandkids. He wants to spend time on a passion project he has in Montana for helping to build corporate leaders to do more good with their wealth. He wants to do other things than just have to chase deals, okay? And so he sold his $7.6 million property, and he was still skeptical, by the way, the first time he met with me, and I'm here in Northern California. And we sat down, and he and his son, and we went through this in detail, and he said, you know what, I'm gonna chew on this and think about it. I like it. I still love the 1031, but not when COVID-19 hit. So all of a sudden, he goes from, oh my gosh, I have $7.6 million that I need to replace, of which he had about $4.5 million of debt. He goes, Brett, he called me, let's do it. I'm doing the Deferred Sales Trust. So he paid off $4.5 million of debt, and he parked the money into this Deferred Sales Trust, okay, and deferring $1.1 million of tax. And so he plans to keep the funds invested and in a conservative portfolio of liquid and illiquid investments. In fact, he's put $500,000 with a gentleman who manages over $1.1 billion and owns $1.1 billion in multifamily properties. And then he put some in hard money lending fund as well. So who is this presentation for? Well, this is for anyone who has a highly appreciated business, investment real estate, primary home, or other assets subject to capital gains tax. Here's the key. We need to have at least $1 million net of all debt, and at least, I say $500,000. We're really kind of doubling that to about $1 million of gain. So about $1 million and $1 million. If it's net proceeds of $1 million at least, and about $1 million of gain, it's actually a pretty solid fit. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is a deferred sales trust? Well, a deferred sales trust is just an installment sale. So if I come to Kyle and say, hey, Kyle, I want to buy your $10 million apartment complex, would you carry back paper? Would you become the lender? Imagine Kyle owns that free and clear. Well, in that scenario, he can do that. It's called an installment sale. It goes back to the 1920s. It's very well known. Your CPA knows about it. You probably know about it. But in that scenario, if Kyle does not receive any of the money right away, it's in a deferral state, kind of like how 401k works, also kind of how a 1031 works, okay? But guess what? The Deferred Sales Trust I want to propose to you during this presentation is like the Netflix versus the Blockbuster. Well, what's the Blockbuster, Brett? Well, it's the old transactional way of doing things, okay? It's like the 1031 exchange, right? And let's talk about that right now, okay? The 1031 exchange. Why is 1031 like a Blockbuster? Well, the first swing is this, what I call the 1031 sprint. Okay, you sell, you got a bag full of money, and you are running, right? And you are running to find that deal. Now, you might be smart and you get with Kyle early, and he finds you an off-market deal, and you guys work it all out before you even sell, right? And so now you're not having to really force yourself into buying something you don't want to buy. But sometimes, guess what? It doesn't work out. And sometimes you're sprinting like this gentleman, and for 45 days, we call it the shotgun wedding, right? You're getting engaged in 45 days. You're going to get married in 180. But guess what our parents taught us to do? They told us to sell high and buy low. They didn't teach us to sell high and buy higher 180 days later with a property that maybe we didn't want to buy because it didn't make a whole lot of sense, with cap rates being at 3, 4s, and 5s, with not a lot of rental upside and forced depreciation. So the 1031 exchange is the worst for this. Do you see how it's like the Blockbuster? Do you remember Kyle going to Blockbuster on a Friday night? This is the part where you're engaged a little bit. And you show up, Kyle, and you want to see that movie. And that movie's at the end of the aisle, but it's behind that cardboard. But as you're walking up, Kyle, what happens? Somebody else grabs that movie, and you're like, oh, you're bummed out, right? But even if you got that movie, Kyle, guess what? You got to return it within 3 days. And if you don't return it within 3 days, then you get a penalty. So you got to drive in the snow. It's all, you drove there, you're frustrated, and then you're thinking about returning it, but it's snowing outside again, so you're frustrated again. So that's Blockbuster. That's the 1031, okay? It's not the most favorable with timing, whereas the Netflix is what? Anytime you want, Kyle, right? You can just click it on. You can watch it. It's never sold out. Yeah, there's some membership ongoing fees, but you don't have to get in the snow and drive, and you don't have to do those frustrating things. You can buy whenever you want. And that's the first thing and the most important thing about this, and why I started the company, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The second thing is depreciation. Kyle, why is depreciation so important?
Well, depreciation is a paper loss that a lot of people will take advantage of for accounting purposes. And what ends up happening with the 1031 exchange is you get to defer that depreciation recapture, sort of like a free loan from the government, where you get to reuse their money that they're owed. And it's one of the tenets of what makes a 1031 exchange great.
You nailed it, right? So it's going to offset the cash flow and make it a zero tax transaction. So you might have done some cost segregation. You might just do straight line. But like a multifamily, you got about a 27.5-year period of time. But guess what? If you fully depreciate it, we call this the candle burning on one end, and you 1031, guess what? Your old depreciation travels with you. So Kyle, if you've owned a $10 million property and you fully depreciate it down to zero, and you buy another $10 million property, guess what? You have no more depreciation. It's still zero. And that's not good. So you lose out on one of the best benefits if you go with the old Blockbuster way. But Kyle, what if there was a way like a Netflix that gave you a brand new depreciation schedule? Would that be powerful?
Absolutely. And I think it's important as we're talking through this, and I know it'll be one of the discussions, is that the acronym DST can often get confused with Delaware Statutory Trust, and a Deferred Sales Trust is very different. And we'll dive into what that means. The other thing that I want to mention is, for those of you that have joined us a few minutes after we started, there's obviously some tax and some legal disclaimers that you missed. Obviously, this is one viewpoint that Brett is sharing, and it is something that is legal that he's done and we'll talk about the IRS rulings and different things. Then finally, there is a chat thread that if you have a question and you'd like for me to engage that question, just drop it into the chat thread and we'll try to get to it as best we can.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kyle. So going back to the 1031 exchange, right? You have the old timing like Blockbuster versus unlimited timing with Netflix. You also have old depreciation schedule versus new depreciation schedule. And another one we want to talk about is the ability for the whole entity not to move. So you might have partnerships that you want to separate. Well, guess what? Most 1031s that we've seen, the whole entity must move. There's been some creative drop and swap stuff, but that can kind of get you in some gray areas. And then the biggest thing though is lack of diversification. Okay. So right now, given the uncertainty, we have found for our clients, they're looking for liquidity, to be out of debt, to be diversified. What does that mean? Well, in a 1031, you're trading, let's say, 50 units or 5 units for 10 units or 50 units for 100 units. And you might be diversifying with multiple tenants, more tenants, but you're still in the same asset class, maybe in the same general location, and you're not truly diversifying outside of asset classes. So what does that mean with the deferred sales trust? Well, I can put the money into stocks, bonds, mutual funds. I can put it into hard money lending. I can just sit it in the bank, right? I can put it into passive or active investment real estate deals. I can put it into real estate development deals. So there's a whole world of, like, call it Netflix, of choices you can choose, versus Blockbuster. It's like just having the one VCR tape that's all you can do, because it has to be like kind investment property. Okay. So as a quick background, I worked and started out at a company called Marcus Millichap. And I was trained by some of the best in the business in multifamily here in Northern California. Before that, I grew up with my dad in the Bay Area building custom homes. And so real estate's always been in my blood. I love real estate. And so over the years, I've also raised funds and syndicated. I've also done countless 1031 exchanges, Delaware statutory trust, which is exactly what Kyle said. It's not a deferred sales trust. They're both DSTs. Think of the Delaware, which you've probably heard about, like a tenant in common deal, or just a 1031 DST is a better way to think about it. It's still in the form of Blockbuster, okay? And then, of course, deferred sales trust, which we specialize in. And I speak at different places. I've been on Kyle's podcast, is one of my favorite, and I speak at all these other places. One of my favorite, though, is Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank. You might recognize him with Mark Cuban. They sat on the first 6 seasons together at Shark Tank. And so I was on Kevin's show. He's been on mine. And let's see, I might become a part of his dream team. I don't know. I'm praying that it happens, but we'll find out. He's vetting the deferred sales trust right now. But it wasn't always easy, guys. I wasn't always this YouTube or podcast guy. Honestly, I was not Leonardo DiCaprio celebrating. I was one of the guys in the back, like scratching my head, like, how are these people making all this money in real estate? And how are they closing these deals? And these things are complex. So I started out at 2006 at Marcus Millichap. That I was just getting trained, getting going, and then the market took a big hit. And I was at a point where I was getting some success, but it went like, 20, 30, 40,000 a year to like zero, like overnight. In fact, that was the 2008 crash. And I went from like, I don't know if you've ever been so scared where you're not sure how you're going to provide for your family or how you're going to make it in the business. A lot of friends, family, some people tell me, go get a real job, get out of commercial brokerage. But I go, I love the business. I want to make it. I'm learning so much. I have great mentors, but I was scared. My wife was at home with our first daughter, and we didn't know how we were going to make it. And so, in fact, when I was closing deals, this is one deal, Kyle, what do you think? 7 units, $129,000 a unit. Okay. And the rents were, I don't know, $600 to $800, but that's a pretty good deal, right? For 7 units. But after my commissions and after my split with the big 50-50 Marcus and Millichap, I had $1,900. It wasn't going to happen. So I did what every good entrepreneur does, or business owner, or someone who has a dream. You figure out a way to make it. And so I don't know if you guys have Cheesecake Factory out there. I think you probably do in Denver, right? So my wife and I's favorite restaurant, I went and got a side hustle at Cheesecake Factory. And so by day, I'd be making cold calls, helping my clients hopefully sell multifamily property, trying to. And by night, I was at Cheesecake Factory. And this is my actual manager here on the left. His name is Kerry. That's not me in the background with the blue tie, although I would wear the same tie, Kyle, at Marcus and Millichap making cold calls by day. By night, I would just switch my outfit. And one time, honest truth, I'm calling a guy who has like $5 million worth of real estate. I'm trying to get his listing. And he's in the other room, right? As I'm calling him like the week before. I'm like, oh my gosh, if he recognizes me, I'm never going to win that listing. Let's just say it was a humbling experience, but it was also a chance to really fortify what I loved and believed in, which was making it in the business. So just at the time when it was the toughest, by the way, I moved in with my brother in this small condo. My wife was super supportive, and we were just going to continue to go. She was home full time. Okay. So it was tough. Okay. So my manager brings in a gentleman to speak about the deferred sales trust. And this was a moment when he comes in and he starts talking to us like, hey, what happened? And this is 2009. So this is post-crash, and he's like, hey, there's something that called a deferred sales trust. We could have saved your clients. It could have diversified. It could have got rid of the 1031. Because once we identified that the 1031 was a big challenge because it felt people were forced to overpay, we figured out the solution with the deferred sales trust. So like most people, I was skeptical. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I almost had nothing to lose. So I'm like, I'm going to try this thing and see if clients resonate with it. So I started to roll it out to clients and to start to educate. And fast forward 10 years later, 11 years later, wife and I, we have 5 kids. We live in Sacramento. And I just educate and coach people. This is all I do every day now, mostly brokers and mostly commercial real estate syndicators, financial advisors. And my wife's been able to stay home full time. And we've been able to support and be able to make it in the business, not without our bumps and bruises along the way. But this is why I say all that for this reason right here. After 10 plus years, I discovered the hard way of how to do this. But how many of you want to learn the easy way? Okay, you can put that in the chat. You can raise your hand. You can just nod your head. How many? I want to give you as much of my secrets as I can right now. Okay. By the way, if you've been struggling, this is probably why. The perfect storm, which we touched on before, all of the challenges with if you're a baby boomer, highly appreciated assets, next to no depreciation. Number two, your CPA didn't know about it. It's not your fault. Your CPA didn't even know about it, right? In fact, a lot of those folks, they're great. They're smart. They're probably even smarter than me, but they're general practitioners in what they do. And they're not necessarily niche focused in this one area, which is, by the way, created by a CPA tax attorney who's my business partner. Next, most commercial real estate brokers don't want you to know about this. Now, Kyle is a great value add client centric first, and he wants you to have all of the tools that are available, that are legal and open to you. But most commercial real estate brokers don't want you to know about it, right? They want to keep you in the 1031 exchange, having you potentially buy something you don't want to buy. And guess what? The 1031 exchange companies definitely don't want you to know about it because they're the Blockbuster and they don't want Netflix to succeed, okay? So what you've been forced to do over the last 10 years, okay? We call this a 1031 exchange, the Blockbuster, right? You had to hire the broker, 5 to 6% commission. By the way, I'm a broker. If you want to do a 1031 in Sacramento, I'll happily help you, okay? I won't say no to that, but that can be expensive. You have to sell your property, another 0.5% closing cost. You have to hire attorneys, hire the qualified intermediary, draft maybe a new LLC, identify 3 properties in 45 days, close in 180, maybe apply for a new loan. How many of you try to apply for a new loan lately? How much harder is it to get a loan? Oh my gosh, rates are low, but the banks are very strict. It can be very stressful. Buy a property. Hopefully you didn't overpay for it. Take on more debt, maybe than you want it to. Maybe you're feeling more pressure. Your upfront costs could be hundreds of thousands of deals. It could be 6 months of your life. It's hire new management, new leases, new utilities, new debt, new laws, new eviction control, new rent control. I'm in California. It's a mess right now with rent control. It's really endless, okay? It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of stress, okay? So here we go. I'm going to teach you how to build an entire optimal timing wealth plan live right now in 30 minutes. So there's really 3 secrets to this. It's 3 secrets to an optimal timing transformational exit plan, okay? Secret number 1, selling and deferring hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in capital gains tax, how to legally break free from capital gains tax and find freedom to buy and sell your business or property without ever worrying about a 1031 exchange ever again. Secret number 2, I call this my optimal timing transformational wealth plan cloning. How to clone a proven wealth plan with capital gains tax solutions in less than 5 hours and have more time, energy, and debt freedom without giving up control or protection of your cash. And in secret number 3, I call this my number 1 wealth building hack, how to get your deferred sales trust to work in your favor and become an investment rather than an expense. So let's start with secret number 1. Basically, how do we get rid of Blockbuster forever? Okay, here we go. Meet Joe, okay? And this is a client of Kyle's maybe 5 years ago who is frustrated. Maybe it was 2006, Kyle, or maybe it was last month, okay? And he feels trapped. Why? Because he's got 30 to 50% in capital gains tax and depreciation recapture, and it hurts to overpay. He gets a black eye. He gets frustrated. Again, this is the story of a lot of clients before they meet the deferred sales trust. So what's step number 1? Well, what Kyle can do and we can do with Kyle is to help you determine your capital gains tax liability. Pretty simple, right? What's your basis? What's your gain? And then we apply the state and federal and then rates, and then we give you that number. But number 2, which is really on you, we want to help you though envision your ideal wealth plan. How much time do you want to be spending with your properties? How much time do you want to be spending with banks? How much time do you want to spend with new tenants, new toilets, new trash, new liability? Versus what your time and energy or wealth could be put in. What's your ROI? What's your return on equity, right? I'm doing a deal right now for a client or helping a client potentially sell a $2.5 million property in Northern California, and they have next to a 0 basis, and they have the return on equity is very low. They bought it for 1.2, next to no debt. And so we're looking at ways to return their equity and make it work for them, right? Step number 2 is look at a side-by-side comparison for the tools, the DST versus the 1031. By the way, for the deal we just did in Colorado Springs, this was a very common thing. And in fact, they had a 0 basis. They were in their 70s and they were looking at the DST for the very first time. We were able to sell, defer all of the tax, at close of escrow, move it all into the trust. They saved and deferred about $1.8 million of tax, but they also moved out about $2 million outside of their taxable estate, which we'll touch on here in a minute. But the key is they wrote down a piece of paper and they said, what do we want to do with our wealth? What do we want to do with our time? And which tool, the deferred sales trust versus the 1031 exchange, gets us to where we want to be? Do we want a new depreciation schedule? Yes. Do we want to be able to buy whenever we want? Yes. Do we want to be able to be out of debt when we want to? Yes. Do we want to be able to diversify our investments? Yes. Do we want to be able to move it outside of our taxable estate? Yes. I mean, literally, it's just all the way down, Netflix all the way, versus the Blockbuster, which gives none of those things. Okay. So step number 3, though, is to just talk with people who've actually done this. Well, do you have clients you can talk with, Brett? Yes, we do. In fact, they're on my podcast. They're on my YouTube page. You can actually watch their interview about their transaction, and just figure out, okay, you've done it. Maybe I could do it too. Okay. Step 4, where do the funds go? Important. They go to a bank. After that, if you go into stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, they go to TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, I think the largest in the world now, and you have 24/7 access to view the funds online. Okay, so back to Dave, bring it back here. Okay, so this is what Dave has done. By the way, Dave is one of my best clients, and you can watch him live on my page right now. But remember, the biggest thing was he wanted to sell high and buy low. This is basically what this whole page says here. So how does this whole thing work? Kyle, are you ready to participate?
I'm ready, Brett.
All right. Do you have a live deal, Kyle, that we can kind of walk through without giving any client confidentiality stuff away? Or would you like me to just use my own?
I'd love it if you use your own, but yes, I have several that are under contract and people that I'm thinking of that this could work well for.
Okay, so we'll use the Dave deal, right? So 7.6 million. We'll just stick with that one. Okay, he had $4.5 million of debt. Okay, so that's a lot of debt, right? That he wanted to get rid of, and then his liability. We'll put it up here in the corner. Okay, 1.1 million of tax liability. Okay. Of tax liability. So this is the big thing that we're trying to solve for, right? We're trying to solve for how to defer that. All right. So in a traditional sale, Kyle, if somebody were to give my client Dave all 7.6 million tomorrow, right, at close of escrow, and that hits his actual hands, his actual bank account, is this tax trigger? Is this going to trigger his tax right here?
Yes.
Right, because he received all of it, right? Correct. Now, if he were to send, instead of doing that, if he were to say, you know what, I want to just send the money to a QI company over here, this 1031 company. Does that hit his hands, Kyle, if the money went to the 1031 company instead of going to his hands?
It does not. And for those that are listening, QI is qualified intermediary, and that is basically the group that's going to be holding on to those funds. It can be a variety of different companies, or it could be a CPA. There's a lot of different people that can qualify as that qualified.
Exactly right. And kind of like a 401k, right? If you have a 401k or an IRA, it's the same concept. Instead of taking the money directly to you, you send it to this third-party company that helps to do the custodian and connect that. And therefore, it's in a tax deferral state, okay? So that makes sense, right, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay. So how does this thing work? Well, instead of having the funds sent to, their hands, what we're going to do is Kyle's going to line up the buyer for 7.6 million. They've got cash. By the way, they can get a lender. They can get a loan. Let me change the color. It's a little bit weird to see there. So they're going to get the 7.6 million cash. We don't care how they bring it with the loan, but instead of sending the cash directly there, they're actually going to just buy it from the trust. And what's the trust going to do? Well, the trust is going to buy it from Dave for 7.6 million. So follow me, Kyle. If the trust bought it for 7.6 million and sold it for 7.6 million, how much gain does the trust have, Kyle?
0.
You got it. So how much tax does the trust owe on 0?
0.
You got it. Okay. Now, what the client gets, by the way, we pay off this debt over here, right? So the bank gets their money, and what's left over is about $3.1 million net of closing costs, right? Commissions, everything else. But they don't receive that. They get what's called a promissory note, right? They carried back paper. Remember that installment sale I talked about in the beginning? So they receive a 0 down payment, Kyle, and they carry back 100% financing. So Kyle, how much does Dave owe today if he receives $0?
0.
You got it. So this 1.1 million, you see how that is actually deferred. Does that make sense, Kyle?
Yes.
Okay.
Type of model as the old-fashioned owner carry.
You got it. It's just an installment sale, right? And well, what are the terms of that? Well, typically it's 8% compounding, and it's a 10-year term. Most of our clients will have interest-only payments, somewhere between 5 and 6%. And they will, every 10 years, you can renew for 10 years. And then you can pass it on inside of your living trust to your kids. Okay. So Kyle, when do you want to pay this 1.1 million of tax?
You probably never want to pay it.
You got it, right? Because we want to use it to build our family's wealth and give to charities and causes we believe in most, right? And our kids can live off it and grandkids.
And
So
Brett, I love to have fun at my own expense. So hopefully the audience that is listening on our podcast when we launch this tomorrow on Apple Podcasts, but anybody, am I going into debt with myself here?
not with yourself, right? So the trust is going into debt, right? So the trust owes you the money, right? Just like if you send it to a qualified intermediary, technically they owe you the money if you don't complete your exchange, right? So think of it like it's kind of like your own QI company. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like your own 401k. It's kind of like a lot of things, but it's a deferred sales trust. So this trust owes you 100% of this 3.1 million on with 8% compounding. Typically is where we structure it over 10 years with a balloon payment due in 10. Although we can definitely structure it different ways. Okay, payments can start immediately. Payments can start in a couple years, but it owes you all that. But at the end of that 9 years, 6 months, Kyle, I call you and say, "Do you want to renew it?" And you say, "Yeah, I'll renew it for another 10, pass it to my kids." Right? So it's this ongoing thing, right? In the meantime, guess what? There's an extra 1.1 million, right? You would have had 2 million, but instead you got 3.1. So this is an interest-free loan from the government. What's the government charging you? They charge you 0. So Kyle, if the government gives you a 0 interest loan for 1.1 million, when do you, and you can go invest it in real estate and live off the interest, when do you want to pay that loan back?
Never.
You got it. We call it the second date of never. So I'm going to pause right here. Kyle, I want to make sure crystal clear you understand what's happening because this is the most important probably slide of everything that's here. So any questions here, Kyle? Is that making sense?
Yeah, the way I am understanding this, and tell me if I'm wrong, like I said, I like to have fun with the audience at my own expense here. So we're taking this property, we are buying it from ourselves and having that equity put into a deferred sales trust.
Pause. You're not buying it from yourself.
All right.
You are selling your asset. You're selling your asset to the trust.
Okay.
Okay. And the trust is selling it to the ultimate buyer. So there's 3 parties, right?
Just like in the exchange, because that happens the same way too.
Exactly. In fact, the 1031 is based upon a lot on the IRC 453 installment sale. It's very, very similar to what's happening here. So you are selling it to this trust, but you are carrying 100% financing back. So this first part of it, Kyle, that's just a regular installment sale.
Right.
Right. If you think about it, the difference is this trust give you a 0 down payment. Now you never do that in real life. Why? Because there's no skin in the game, right? There's no collateral, right? That's why traditional installment sales don't go over so well because they're short in nature. There's no real diversification. There's no liquidity. And you might have to foreclose on this thing, Kyle. I could run this thing into the ground. But instead, we have the funds go into what? A liquid, diversified investment grade securities. Better than that, investment real estate of your own with partners. And we diversify this all these different little areas. We might do a little bit of stock, do a little bit of multifamily, a little bit of mobile home park.
So as you're doing that, I have a few other questions.
Yep, go ahead.
That you may get to. When a lot of my clients will do this multiple times, they'll have multiple 1031 exchanges from multiple properties. Do you create one DST for your family, or are you going to potentially have 4 or 5 or 10 of these as you continue to liquidate properties?
Great question. So there's really 2 trusts that we like. Okay. So the answer is 2, but no more than 2. Here's why. The first one is basically 10 million and below, okay, per transaction. Okay, 10 million below. It's kind of the limit where there's no interest charges, okay? By the way, as many as you can primary home in there, investment real estate in there, business in there. It's all your assets can be in this one trust.
And I want to park there for just a moment. For if someone missed it, the primary home is something that when someone becomes wealthy, you have that limit of currently $500,000 married filing jointly, $250,000 for singles. And that can be a big area of capital gain that a lot of people don't think about and don't know what to do with. And then the other part of it too is a business. Most of the time people think of the like kind exchange for a 1031 purpose is this is a way I can handle my investment real estate. But what do you do with your primary residence? And then also if you have a sale of a business?
You got it. And remember, 1031 only works for investment real estate. It doesn't work for a primary home. That's why you have what's called the 121 exclusion, which Kyle had mentioned. So we want to take, essentially think of the deferred sales trust as the hub, the mothership. Okay. And we're selling assets and we're moving the equity, paying off the debt, moving the equity into the trust, into the trust, into the trust. And you're compiling all of this money And let's say after 5 properties or whatever, it's 10 million equity. Now we go put it into a portfolio that hopefully, not guaranteed, is going to be earning 8%, okay, compounding. And that's what's going to be paying you in this promissory note, okay? If you want it to in the given year, or it's just building like a 401k, it's just building and building and building. So it's income tax deferral, it's capital gains tax deferral. Now, if you're above this amount, or if you have a really big deal, we use what's called the DST plus. In fact, that's what the clients did in Colorado for 2 reasons. One, their net worth is, a better way to put it is your net worth is above 20 million, okay? Or it's going to be if you're pretty young. Why? Because we moved all of the funds outside the taxable estate. So on that 5 million, Kyle, guess what? All 25 million was inside of the taxable estate until they moved this 5 million out, and that saved them 40% on 5 million, which is what? $2 million bucks. So the estate tax challenges we can solve in one day, one transaction, without giving it all away to charity. Okay, so that is just that. It in and of itself is amazing. Okay, so I'm going to keep going because we still have a lot to cover. But remember, you can rewind this and see this. Okay, and I'm probably going to answer your questions here moving forward. We've done this presentation quite a bit. So again, who does this work for? The Deferred Sales Trust works for just about any highly appreciated asset. Primary homeowners. Now, the home needs to be worth 1.5 million or more, because you have that 121 exclusion of 500 married, 250 single. So we typically need a bigger house. Probably owned it for 10 or 20 years, right? You have a low basis. We just did an $8.3 million deal in Palo Alto. So we typically need bigger homes, okay? But business owners, we've done car dealerships, we've done tech entrepreneurs, we've done dentists, veterinarians, optometrists, okay? It works for collectibles, artwork, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, okay? It works for real estate developers, syndicators, operators, LLCs, LPs, just about any type of high net worth client. If you have highly appreciated asset, guess what? The Deferred Sales Trust works for you. Here's an actual deal story of another client of mine. His name is Steve. Steve grew up in a multifamily business world with his parents being realtors. They own about 30 million. Anyone ever been to Napa? Well, he lived and grew up in Napa. So wine country, beautiful. They own, and all they talked about at dinner table, he talked about is real estate transactions, 1031s. So how many of you know that real estate is like a religion? Okay, it's like a religion. And by the way, I love that religion. I'm a part of that religion. I love commercial real estate. And how many of you know that the 1031 is the doctrine? Well, that was the doctrine that was taught every day, okay? You know, that and other things with real estate. What happened with Steve? Well, Steve, for the first time, when I sold his property for $270,000 a unit, flat roofs, 2s and 3 bedrooms, average $1,400-1,500, bullseye location, downtown Sacramento, great property, but he bought it for $700,000. Well, he's going to do the 1031. I'm like, Steve, you can do it. I'll do the 1031, but know that we have the DST as a backup plan. Well, wouldn't you know it? Big thing hit. We call it Murphy's Law, right? Something can go wrong, it goes wrong. Well, John's family, in the middle of the escrow of selling this, his father-in-law passed away, and all of a sudden there's a family emergency for capital and the estate stuff. So he had to bail out on the 1031 that Steve and John had going. But it actually was a blessing in disguise, right? Because this is pre-COVID. This is December of 2019, okay? And Steve's bummed out, but he's like, okay, Deferred Sales Trust, I'm doing it. Let's do it. Okay, so we did it. He paid off all of his debt, saved his failed 1031 exchange. By the way, the Deferred Sales Trust can save a failed 1031 exchange. And it maintained the relationship. They both were able to go their separate ways. John was able to help his family out. Steve was able to defer his tax. It literally saved their business relationship, okay? Here's a client of mine. He's actually a transactional attorney for business sales out of Las Vegas. He used it for his own deal. Here's a few other recently closed and live deals. So some big deals there, okay? And some other ones that are under contract. Here's a deal I just did on an Aptos just south of Santa Cruz. $7.9 million sale. They had about $1.9 million of debt. Paid off the debt, deferred the $2.6 million of tax. Very happy. Here's that primary home sale I told you about in Palo Alto. $8.3 million sale. So hopefully you're catching on what we're talking about here. And at the end of what we're talking about, really I'm hoping that you gather is not only the Netflix versus the Blockbuster, but it's really wealth transformation. Why? Because you get debt freedom. You get the tax deferred. You get your wealth diversified. We think diversification is so important right now. Multiple product types and locations. You can put it into multiple commercial real estate syndications with multiple commercial real estate operators, okay? So if you're like, I'm not a big stock market person, I'm like, yeah, guess what? Either am I, right? Let's not do stock market. Let's do commercial real estate. Let's do hard money lending. Let's do different geographical locations with active or passive, okay? You get your wealth liquid, okay? For the extent that your wealth is liquid, in the trust and invest it, there, you can cash out. We do need to keep 20% liquidity, by the way, for the trust. I want to let you know, we can't put 100% into just active real estate or passive real estate. We got to keep some liquidity. But you also get time to enjoy your wealth, right? A lot of our clients are the baby boomers where they're like, you know what? I've made enough. I've got enough. At least I want to preserve it right now. I might want to create more later, but I don't want to take any unnecessary risk given the times that we're in. Which leads to no more toilets, trash liability if you never want it again. Some clients never want that active part again, okay? But again, opportunity to grow your wealth at optimal timing when the market goes on. This is one of the best deal stories I know, Kyle. Gentleman sold his property in 2006. We call it the Monday morning quarterback. It's across the street from Minnesota Vikings Stadium. He sold it for $20 million. This guy is brilliant. He's worth a couple $100 million of commercial real estate, hates the stock market. But in 06, like, I don't know if you guys saw the movie The Big Short, right? He kind of saw it coming. And he goes, you know what? I'm not going to do a 1031 exchange. Makes 0 cents. I'll take a shot on this deferred sales trust thing. He did it, put all of his money on the sidelines. 5 years later, the bank calls him and says, hey, would you like to buy back your property you sold to that you sold to the buyer? And they, what do you mean? Well, we just foreclosed on it from the guy who overpaid for it, right? And he goes, well, maybe. What's the price? They go, we'll sell it to you for 60 cents on the dollar. So he used his trust money, formed an LLC, all tax deferred the entire time, and he used that money to buy back the same property at 60 cents on the dollar. He traded time. It's like a time machine here, right? And I heard that story the first time. I said, tell it to me again. Tell it to me again. Tell it to me again. Because I was thought to believe that 1031 was the end-all be-all doctrine. But guess what? There's a thing called an installment sale, and there's a specialty called a deferred sales trust. And that's the actual story why I started the company. I said, this will change everything for real estate. If I can just help enough people understand the legality, the transformation, and what it could do for them, it'll change it forever. And guess what? Biden is talking about taking away the 1031. He's talking about getting rid of it. So this may be the only game in town coming in the near future. Kyle, any thoughts on that?
It's a great point about the current political climate and what may happen at 1031 exchanges. We have 2 questions from the audience that I want to ask you if the time is appropriate.
Let's jump in.
All right. So from Mike, when do you sell the property to the trust? Anytime or at the time a buyer buys the property?
Great question. So we set up everything prior to, just like you would set up a 1031 prior to close, but we actually don't even execute until the buyer is willing to perform. So you owe us nothing and no is there any risk to you unless and if the buyer performs. But we do all the pre-legal work. We get everything ready to go, but you only actually pay us, like Kyle would only get paid if he closes the deal on a commission, right? Same thing with us. We only get paid if and when it closes. So we take all the risk, all the pressure off. So it's not like you're selling it to this trust and like hanging out for 6 months to find a buyer. No. We do it like a simultaneous close.
Great. Second question from Randy. Who manages the diversified assets in the trust?
Great question. So a third-party unrelated financial advisor, he's my business partner. His name is Robert. He played for the 49ers, got his Super Bowl ring in Miami, and he's on Financial Forbes Council. He's the co-founder of the Deferred Sales Trust. He's my mentor. He's the guy who came into Marcus Millichap and talked about it. So he would manage the money. Important here, okay? There's got to be a separation between you and the management of, especially the day-to-day, okay, until you put it into the LLC and go buy your own active deal, then it's like you're running your own deal. Now, we'll talk about that in more detail. We basically partner with the trust, but third-party unrelated financial advisor and myself, we together, by the way, that's part of why I'm not the financial advisor. We keep a separation between the trustee and the financial advisor. Financial advisor can't be the trustee. Trustee can't be the financial advisor. So it's like the balance of powers. And then we have the tax attorney. So we're all a team working together. Nothing moves without your signature, which leads really into the next part of this is how do we know this is legal? How do we know the funds are protected? So Kyle, can I keep going there?
That's great.
Okay. So step number 1 is understand our track record. Okay. So thousands of successful closes, billions under management. Last year alone, over $2 billion of gross sales for assets sold. And it's been tested and tried by the IRS over a dozen times, all no change IRS audits, no pending litigation, which leads into the second thing is audit defense, okay? Lifetime audit defense provided by the tax attorneys, and everything's on a conditional basis, meaning you don't get charged unless you close the deal. They stand behind their work and they're batting 1,000, not one single issue, no pending litigation either, okay? Next is the funds don't move without your signature, nor are they invested anywhere without your approval. Okay, approval and written signature. Okay, you've got to sign. So Kyle, if you sold your property and moved the funds into the Deferred Sales Trust, did the funds move without your signature?
They do not.
No. Now, if you sold your property, you pay the tax, and you moved it into this same investment account, do they move without your signature?
They do not.
They do not. So literally, it's the same protection. Now, do I have to sign as well as a trustee? Yes, I do. Right? Am I unrelated to? Yes, I have to be unrelated. I can't be your cousin. I can't be your employee. The reasons these old structures, some structures that are similar, have failed in the past, people have wanted to have too much control, and it wasn't really a truly third-party trustee. They wanted to have their college roommate. They wanted to have their, their nephew. They wanted to have their secretary. We strict line. It has to be a third-party, unrelated trustee. And that's part of what keeps the tax deferral going. Same reason you can't have your own 1031 company, right? And 1031 into that. All right, secret number 2, and I promise these next 2 will be faster than the first one, okay? But it's like, what happens once the funds are, there in the trust? Well, how do I clone a proven wealth plan with us? By the way, you can have your own financial advisor overlook the allocation, give suggestions. We gladly work with your trusted advisors now, and you're welcome to pay them on an hourly basis to give you some advice, and then we can typically mirror or close to mirror what they recommend, right? No problem, okay? But how to clone a proven wealth plan with capital gains tax solutions in less than 5 hours to gain more time, wealth, energy, and debt freedom without giving up control or protection of your cash. So this is the plan, Kyle. You ready? You remember Leonardo in the beginning? He was celebrating that call. Well, I want you guys to be celebrating with me like this, okay? I want you guys to sell high with Kyle. I want you to fund the Deferred Sales Trust. And then I want you to invest at any time, okay? It's so simple. Sell high and buy low. And you guys are smart. Or Kyle is smart. He'll find you that deal when it makes sense. But it might be tomorrow. It might be day 46. It might be day 181. It might be 5 years later, like the guy in Minnesota, buying it back from the bank, the same property. By the way, he got a brand new depreciation schedule on the property that he sold, right? Remember that. That's a really powerful part of this, okay? So step 1, map out a wealth plan with me and your trusted advisors. Step 2, sell the asset. Step 3, fund the trust. Step 4, enjoy your wealth. Maybe give more if you want to, but you're not forced to give more, but you can if you want to. 10-year deferred sales trust note. Typically, you can renew every 10 years. 8% is the target, not guaranteed, net of all recurring fees, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Renew after each term as long as you want. Cash out whenever you want and just pay the tax if you want to. So again, what we used to have to do, right? Stay in our primary homes, overpay for a 1031 property, not sell our business, become the lender for a single buyer, right? Not have the diversification, liquidity, or the optimal timing, right? Stay in debt, pay the tax, not very happy. So it's a new way. It's a better way. Hopefully you guys are catching on here. So who here thinks that the Deferred Sales Trust is transformational for you, or could be at this point? Okay, put it in the chat. Raise your hand, give a little smile or thumbs up. We appreciate that so much. So that is secret number 2. Here we go. Secret number 3, my number 1 wealth building hack. Okay, and this is key, right? Because you want to make sure whatever you're investing in, right, is truly a return on your investment and not an expense. Okay, we want to make sure the Deferred Sales Trust works in your favor. And becomes an investment, not an expense. Okay, so how do we do that? We do that by helping you, first of all, sell and defer the tax. And this is another client deal story. I always like deal stories. It brings it to life here. So this is Peter. And Peter said, hey, he had 18 units and he lived in Marin, California, just north of San Francisco. He's driving 2 to 3 hours a week, a couple times a week, back and forth in Sacramento traffic. He goes, Brett, it's a relief to be rid of the apartment building. It was very lucrative, but it came with a lot of headaches. It took up a lot of my time and energy. He's 70. He's like, I want to spend time with my kids and my family. I got enough wealth. I went through this 2008 all over, before. I don't want to go through anything like this potentially. So first of all, he paid off debt. He loved to be debt free. He sold his property for about $1.8 million, and he put about $1.3 million to the trust. The cool thing is he deferred $550,000 of tax. So that's key. We want to make sure that tax number is big. The bigger, the better, right? Because we get a better return on our investment. But how do we make it a savings for him? How do we make the trust actually become an investment and not just an expense? Well, the first thing has to do with tax brackets, right? So let's imagine you're married and you're in a certain tax bracket here, or you're single, whatever it is, right? Your percentages go up based upon your income, right? Well, what if you could just make the deferred sales trust defer your income? So Brett, you can defer the tax and the income. Yeah, remember in the beginning I mentioned you can delay payments. I don't know if I did, but you can delay it. A lot of our clients will delay payments. So let's say you're a high income earner, and with your investment real estate, collectively you're making $440,000 a year, hypothetically, okay? Let's imagine you sold that property tomorrow with Kyle, and that property was producing $200,000 of cash flow, of which let's imagine you had no depreciation. So you're taking that all as income. Well, your bracket is 440. Let's imagine you were married, okay? So you're in that 35% bracket. Well, if we just lower that by 200,000, guess what we do? We drop into the 24% bracket, which does what, Kyle? Instant savings of $70,000. So Brett, you're saying that the trust is building interest and you don't have to take payments? Yes. And I just lowered my tax bracket? Yes. So Kyle, do you see how that's an investment and not an expense if I just saved you $70,000?
Yes, absolutely. And the question I have as a follow-up is, so you earn that income, how do you transfer that into the trust without it touching your hands or hitting your bank account?
Great question. So the trust earned the income is, let me shift that, right? Let me shift that. The trust is a separate entity, earn the income on the investments, right? And since the trust owes you that money, it's able to expense what it owes you. And since, Kyle, remember, if you receive zero today and this year, how much do you owe on zero?
Zero.
You got it. So think of it like a 401k. If I send my money to the 401k, I'm getting some kind of tax advantage. The same thing with the DST, except there's no minimum required distributions and there's no exit fee. You pay the tax when you do it, right? There's no requirement there. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, okay, so ultra high net worth clients, okay? If you're listening, listen right here, right now, okay? This is really, really powerful, okay? And I know it can be daunting to think about estate tax, and it can be daunting to think about ways to do this. But Kyle, any clients who are worth, let's just use a sample of $52 million as of today, given the tax laws, imagine all 52 million is inside of your taxable estate. Okay. What does the government give you? Well, if you're married, they give you a 22 million exemption. It's about 23 million or so now with inflation. Let's just use 22 million is the number. That means if you were to die tomorrow, Kyle, and your spouse were to die tomorrow, God forbid, 40% of that 30 million, 52 minus 22 would be hit with an estate tax. Okay. It has nothing to do with the stepped up basis. Okay. Part of what we've been taught in the 1031 religion is drop until you swap and swap until you drop, and then get the stepped up basis and walk away tax free. Whoa, pause there. Capital gains tax free, not estate tax, Kyle. Okay. So if they drop until they swap, die tomorrow, they get a stepped up basis for 52 million. But guess what, Kyle? The government wants their $12 million within 6 months. You follow that?
Yes.
Okay. So do you see how the deferred sales trust is like the Netflix and not the Blockbuster old way of doing things, which doesn't get it outside of your taxable estate? Literally in one single day, we can sell an asset. We just did in Colorado for $5 million, move all of the funds outside of the taxable estate, and we save them $2 million on that 5. Okay. In this scenario, if we sold a property for $30 million, we would move $12 million outside of the taxable estate. So do you see how the deferred sales trust, Kyle, is an investment and not an expense?
I do see that. And this is a fascinating conversation. And I have a couple of follow-ups. If you've got a moment, I've got another question from the audience, but
Shoot.
I think it's appropriate
In
case anybody has to leave at the top of the hour. How do they get in touch with you, Brett? Obviously, we want to make sure that they speak with you about their specific situation.
First thing is you just email Kyle, okay? So work through Kyle, and Kyle will email me. But if you want to check me out independently, you can go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. That's capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. You can also go to YouTube and search Capital Gains Tax Solutions. iTunes, we got the podcast, okay? So let's keep moving here, okay? And then we'll wrap it up.
I do have that one question, though.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Part of this is because you've mentioned several clients that this has worked for.
Yeah.
So one of the questions comes from Tim is, what are some typical types of funds or investments that end up going into these portfolios that you have seen people use without giving specific investment advice? But what are some of your clients doing once they set up this deferred sales?
Yeah, my favorite is passive multifamily value add real estate in states that are landlord friendly. Okay. So Texas, Florida, Tennessee, probably, I don't even know how, Colorado, I haven't gone there quite yet. but definitely not California right now. Everything's through the roof. Definitely not like in New York. So mobile home park syndications, as well as senior housing assisted living. Those are my three favorite. Okay, most of my commercial real estate clients tend to play in that same boat, but it's what they want. The other things would be, again, some liquidity as well into a fund, hard money lending fund that we use for a group that has over $5 billion of assets under management, multifamily, and they have also a lending fund where they lend to fix and flip folks, and they sell off the debt within 2 weeks. So you may have some ideas, bring them to the table. We'll bring them to the table. Let's match it up. You fill out what's called a risk tolerance questionnaire. So we're not just throwing darts here. Everything's mathematical. Where this risk tolerance questionnaire, it's a 2-page, you can't get it wrong. That gives you, it's no wrong answer. That gives us a score. And that risk tolerance score gives us a potential allocation as well as the interest rate, right? Because it's not always 8. It could be 7 or 6 if your risk is lower, okay? But most of them are 8. Based upon that, we present an allocation. Our goal is to become a part of your dream team, earn your right to bring you great investments and win for you. But you may have it already on your own, and you're doing just fine on that. We're working as a team is really what I want to tell you about, and it's about you. So we're going to say, here's some great ideas. What do you think? You say, I don't like any of those ideas. Okay, the funds don't move anywhere. I found this great idea. Yeah, that looks good. Let's go there, right? It's very, very flexible is what I want to let you know.
Right. Thank you. And this is a question that was on Tim's mind. It's probably on everyone's mind. And I know it will be something that you get into because we talked about it at length is what's the cost for something like
Here we go, guys. Give me just 60 seconds. I promise I'll get to all that. We're giving about 6 minutes actually. Thinking. Yeah, six minutes or so. Okay. So seamless partnership separation. Okay. So if you have multiple partners, okay, if you're a professional practice owner and you guys all want to go your separate ways, guess what? You can use your own DST. So if we had 10 people at a professional practice, 3 of us could use the DST. The other 7 could just pay the tax. Like we don't have to have the whole entity move. Okay. And so again, back to this story, remember the whole entity didn't have to go in the deferred sales trust. John could use the funds for his family emergency and Steve could still defer his tax. Whereas in a 1031, the whole entity would have to have moved to defer the tax. So it saves partnerships. Okay. It makes it a seamless partnership separation. So again, no timing guidelines, purchase at a discount, new depreciation schedule, which you can do cost segregation on. You can be debt-free. You can invest into multiple commercial real estate syndications. It can save a failed 1031, or it can be an alternative. We just do it at close of escrow. So those are the 3 secrets. So let me ask you this, Kyle, and the rest of everyone on here. I want you to ask yourself this. If I just modeled what works, okay? So Kyle, if everyone on here, if you just set a call with your trusted CPA and attorney, whoever you want to bring on, have Kyle come on. Everybody to confirm this thing is legal and it actually works. Okay, that's step number 1. And then number 2, if you were just to sit down with our financial advisor, my business partner, and you bring in yours too to get extra clarity and mapped out where and how the funds would be invested and the risk accounted for. That's step number 2. And number 3, if you were to sit down with me and map out how the deferred sales trust is actually an investment and not an expense. Do you see how you can actually do this? You see it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Get some nods here? Okay. Let me ask you a question. You probably feel like this. Okay. I have a daughter about her age. I have actually 5 kids. And her name's Savannah. My daughter's name's Savannah. This is not my daughter, but about her age. And I know you're feeling like this. Remember, we recorded this. You can go back. Okay. We're going to guide you every step of the way. This is a wobbly bike. You've never rode this bike before. We've been riding this bike. Okay. We move quick, but we'll move at your pace. But we'll walk and guide you every step of the way. Okay. So we have media, training, access, online portals, okay? All the fees, all the paperwork, everything kind of breaking down this, okay? Most of the paperwork. You don't get some of the stuff until you sign the NDAs and stuff. But so what are you going to get for all of this, okay? First of all, if you say, Kyle, I'm ready to do this thing, list the property with Kyle or get on a call with me and Kyle. And what you're going to get with us is what's called white glove CPA tax attorney access. You can bring your trusted CPAs, whatever, get the education and blessing. You get lifetime audit defense and indemnification from the Deferred Sales Trust attorneys. You get 24 transparent access to view accounts, online updates. You get what's called DACA SunWest Bank Account, meaning the funds don't move without your signature. It's direct access control agreement. You get the seamless transaction coordination with me. You get all this other stuff. We don't have much time to cover all of it, but remember, it works for primary homeowners, business owners, collectibles, artwork, cryptocurrency, LLCs, S Corps, C Corps. Okay, just about anyone is highly appreciated. You could see, Kyle. Could you see, Kyle, why these people would pay $100,000 to set it up for them? Could you see that, perhaps, for saving them millions of dollars? Okay, we're not going to charge you 100 grand per se unless you have a really big deal. And by the way, I know this sounds too good to be true, but don't worry. We have a reference list. And again, you can bring your trusted advisors on to speak with us. And for your due diligence, which is no cost on our side, we don't charge you anything. It's 100% no cost unless you choose to use the DST and your deal actually closes. Okay. So this is it. What's the cost? It's about 1.5% to set up one time and about 1.5% recurring. Okay. With the accounts under management. So let's do an example. $1 million deal, Kyle, and that's the sales price, $15,000, one-time fee to the tax attorney. There's about $985,000 now in the DST account. It's going to be about 1.5% on that. About 85 bips hits right away, okay? And the other amount hits as you invest the funds. Now, the goal, remember I told you, is 8% net of recurring fees over that 10-year period of time. Can't guarantee it. We got to go make those investments, right? But we're going to hopefully hit about 9.5, 10 to cover the miscellaneous fees, like a tax return was about $1,500, and then the financial advisor, and includes the trustee, right? So, any questions there on fees, Kyle?
No questions from me. One of the things that I think is a recurring question, and again, Tim had asked it, but it was something I think I mentioned earlier, was that if you're going to do this with your primary residence, I think a lot of people think of trusts as revocable or irrevocable, where you're doing that as it changes title in your property. My understanding, the way you've described it, is you're waiting until the property is sold, whether it's your personal residence or an investment property, right?
Yeah. So clarify on timing wise. Okay. If it's not an investment property, we want to set everything up, have the trust form, have the language and the documentation with Kyle, like say it's an investment property, with him right now. Okay. Before we like to do it even before escrow opens. Okay. We like to do it even before purchase and sale agreement is drafted. We like to. Now, there's some windows. The first window is before the buyer removes all contingencies and when you went into escrow. So we want to do it there. If they've removed all, if it's an investment property, you work with our qualified intermediate and strategic alliance companies, then we can do it on day 46 or day 181. The key is be early. Now, if it's not an investment property, we've got to get this thing set up before the buyer removes all contingencies. Okay. So primary homes, businesses, cryptocurrency, stock, that's got to be in advance. So the key is timing here. And that's why we do no cost due diligence and we set everything up that you don't have to pay anything unless it closes and you actually use the trust.
And again, you're setting this trust up once and you can end up pouring into it multiple times over multiple years.
You got it. And of course, these closing costs would apply, right? So you do the first deal at $1 million, then the next one's at $10 million. Well, it's going to be 1.5% on the $10 million. Now, now as the accounts under management go in, you do get a little bit of a break and on the fees, just so you know. But yeah, this is the general cost of it.
And then the big thing that I was interested in when we first had our conversation, and if you want to go back on the Calibrate Real Estate podcast, Brett was episode 102. If you want to listen to that now, obviously you've listened to an entire presentation, but we'll also be having this air tomorrow on our most recent podcast, so you can listen to both of those. But just that you can have these funds sit in the account while you're waiting to find an investment, and it could be any length of time.
100%, right? That's the reason I started the company, was what's called the time travel aspect of this. Where when time is your friend, you can negotiate and find better deals. When it's not your friend, like the Blockbuster 1031, typically it's harder to find and you end up overpaying. So we want you to transform time, meaning sell high and buy whenever and if it makes sense for you. Does that make sense, Kyle?
Yeah. The final question that I have, and then we'll wrap up here because I know we're running short on time, is just very simply, a lot of the people that are on listening live, but then also maybe listening to the recording later, have families, and they look at what we like to call generational wealth and how to do that in a dignified way. So when this trust is set up, is it going to be for the benefit of heirs? Do they then have to have some, how does that all work once someone passes on?
Yeah, good question. So on the DST regular, right? They would just step into your shoes. So let's say, Kyle, you had 5 kids and you're married and you and your wife both pass and it's 10 million bucks in there. Then they kids step into your shoes and start to receive the cash flow, all tax deferred. If they cash out, they'll pay the tax. That's the DST regular. Okay. The DST plus, where again, if you're worth probably more than 20 million bucks, we move it outside the taxable estate and the beneficiaries of the trust are your kids and they receive it outside of the taxable estate. So that's so one or two, just depending on which one you use, and depending on the size of the deal and your net worth.
Great, Brett. Thank you for giving all of us an option here. I think everybody that's listening in is looking for ways to continue to be efficient with what they've done over multiple years. And they've spent a lot of time, energy, hard work. They've done a lot of different things to get to where they are. And so this is an example of a way that you can be efficient and save some, obviously some big equity with deferring these capital gains forever. And I really like the option. So it's cool when we can have a fellow podcast host. It makes my job easy. Obviously, Brett presents very well. Feel free to contact him. Obviously, plug into his Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast. And thank you for joining us on a live version of the Calibrate Real Estate podcast, which will air tomorrow on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, etc.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.